Stacking Surfer. The life topic, I'm your best friend. Balances in your bank and stack. What's up, everybody? Stacking Surfer back with another awesome interview for you guys today. So I'm excited. I've got JP Cortez. He's the executive director of Sound Money Defense League. And we're going to get into quite a bit of stuff today. We're going to be talking about what is sound money, why is sound money important for you and for this nation, for the United States. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with the tariffs, the new DOGE organization that's supposed to help clean up waste and make things more efficient in the government and hopefully save a lot of money. Are we going to be able to potentially get rid of income tax? You know, can the tariffs really offset that? And then we're going to talk a little bit with JP about legislation, what's going on out there in the world, especially in the United States, where we may be able to help sway legislature to be able to have more favorable laws for gold and silver. So I'm going to bring JP up here now, and we're going to start the interview and have a great conversation. So JT, how are you doing? Welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me on, Jared. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. So I can't remember what channel I was watching you on the other day, but I saw you the other day on a channel, and then I also had saw an email come across from you, and I was excited to connect. Sound money is something that's been becoming more and more important to me. I'm a father of three. My wife and I sit down and we're trying to figure out how do we best help teach our kids and educate them. One of the things we were able to do as they were finishing up high school was have them take some personal finance classes. However, upon scrutinizing the curriculum a little bit more, there was no discussion of sound money whatsoever in that class. It was really just more based on, investing, balancing a checkbook, and being a part of the banking system. And I think that's important, but it really didn't hit kind of on those tenets of what sound money is, and how it could help, how it could help you, and how it's, in my opinion, the most firm foundation that you can build when it comes to someone's finances. So I'd love to better understand from you a little bit of your background, how you got involved into sound money, what the definition of sound money is, and also what your organization does. Love to hear that before we dive into some of the deeper questions.
Sure. Yeah. So like you mentioned, my name is JP Cortez. I'm the executive director of the Sound Money Defense League. We're a national public policy group. We're backed by Money Metals Exchange. They're an online national precious metals dealer. And we go state to state and to Washington, D.C., passing laws that remove the disincentives and all the friction standing in the way of people actually getting to use gold and silver as money. You mentioned that I'm unfortunately not surprised to hear that this personal finance class was lacking. I think that gold and silver and sound money in general have largely escaped the social zeitgeist. Financiers, brokers, they're not advising that people invest in gold and silver. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But ultimately, what we're talking about when we say gold and silver, we're talking about a money that has been tested by the market over time and has retained its value. So this is a money like gold and silver that have been money for thousands of years, that have a track record of going from being the standard on which the global economy runs to being cast aside and being mocked and derided during congressional hearings about how it's not money and it's a barbarous relic. And despite the difference in attitudes towards the role that gold has played in the global monetary system, we find that still gold is retaining its value. It's still acting as a hedge against inflation. And if you look closely, you'll see that despite the words from congressmen and central bankers here in the United States, you'll find that central banks all over the world are stockpiling gold. And it's not just central banks that have an adversarial relationship to the United States either. It's states themselves. We're working on legislation in multiple states to establish state gold reserves. So a lot of institutions, countries, and of course individuals are looking towards de-dollarizing. They've seen that the global reserve currency, the US dollar, what was once the strongest reserve currency at all in the world, is actively being devalued. It's being politicized and perverted, used to fund and fight wars all over the world, used to grow a bureaucracy that ultimately harms American citizens, and money that's regularly given away. We just give away money to other countries, foreign aid. And under the guise of all this, America regularly participates in taking money from the poor people in this country and giving it to the rich people in foreign countries so that they can do whatever they choose to do with it. So sound money acts as a guardrail. It acts as a prophylactic or as a protectant against a government that would otherwise spend money recklessly. We've seen that here in the United States. Unsurprisingly, since 1971, the America coming off the gold standard, we've seen an explosion in the deficit. We've seen an explosion in military and defense spending. We've seen an explosion in millions of dollars being spent on these projects to study the effects of frog masturbation while they listen to jazz and various things like that America is regularly spending money on, while many here in the country can't afford housing, can't afford food, or having a hard time making ends meet. So a lot of people, more than ever before in the 10 years that we've been doing this, are looking inward and asking questions about, wait, what is money? What properties does a good money have? What do we want a money to be able to do? And it turns out a money that retains its value, a money that you can hold over time without it losing its value, is a pretty crucial part of what we want money to do. And there are alternatives and ways to do that. But we have to destroy this system that currently exists, which is a monopoly on money.
I completely agree. Not only is there a monopoly on money, there's nothing backing it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, people might say it's the full faith of the United States. Okay, what does that mean? We're going to nuke other people? Mm-hmm. You don't use our money, we nuke you. That's not really a good thing for the world, and
yeah, absolutely,
it's not really something we're going to pull the trigger on either, right? So there's going to be a time where people realize that their $100 bill that they're holding really doesn't have that value anymore, and we're starting to see that slip now. Go to any restaurant and pay a bill and realize you're paying at least double what you were paying, 4 or 5 years ago.
Go to a grocery store.
Expensive. Yeah. Grocery store is huge too. And it's only getting worse. Go buy eggs. Go try to go buy eggs.
And it's Mises, who is an Austrian economist who inspired a lot of the work that we do. I studied at the Mises Institute, which is an economics institute down in Auburn, Alabama, which is where I sort of got my free market bearings and how I kind of came to appreciate and learn sound money. Mises has a quote about how, and to be fair, this was 70 years ago, so maybe it's not quite as politically correct as it was back then, but the idea that a better metric of inflation than any of these cooked numbers or any of these bankers and bureaucrats telling you that there is no inflation is a judicious housewife who goes and buys groceries at the store once a week and knows cannot be lied to about, oh no, the prices aren't going up. Oh no, you're mistaking this. You're not true. Someone who is in charge of their household finances can do a better job than the people cooking these CPI numbers to tell me that the price of all of these things have gone up. And the housewife or the person in charge of this finances does it without the obnoxious gaslighting about how the economy is actually great and things are rosy. And, these things that we're hearing about the economy being on decline it's propaganda. No, that's absolutely not the case. And you can look around and these are lived experiences. We don't need an economic regression to prove to me that things are more expensive. I can simply go and pay my power bill every month to know that this is the case. I can simply go try to lease a car, rent a car, or buy an airplane ticket, or like you said, a carton of eggs. So I think a big part of it is that it's no longer deniable. And that might be a change with the incoming administration. But I think even before the election, more and more people are waking up to the idea that these metrics are not indicative of reality. People are job revisions, these crafty little alchemy trick that government bureaucrats do, where they will put out a number and wait for markets to react and then go back 6 weeks later and revise the number down. For example, jobs.
For years at a time, they do this, right? They do it every month, but they do it for over a year. Mm-hmm. And no one calls them on any of it, right? They just keep doing it.
what's it like? They're intentionally obfuscating this. It's not an accident. If this were an accident, you would think that maybe the revisions would be up sometimes, they would be down sometimes, but it isn't the case. We're doing this kabuki theater thing, similar to what the Soviet Union was doing, similar to North Korea, where these numbers are so obviously fake that anyone actually working in the real world has to say, no, wait, this isn't right. And so I think what I was saying was, even before the change of hands in administration, this greedflation argument that was very popular, or it's the fault of Putin, it's the Ukraine war, that's the reason.
Supply chain issues, right?
Right, supply chain issues. And so it's just one pivot to the next pivot to the next pivot, without ever actually looking inward or looking at the people who actually have their hands on the levers. For some people, for some reason, it never occurs to us to look at the people who are actually sitting in the driver's seat and saying, hey, maybe it was y'all, maybe it was your fault. And I think a big part of that has to do with the loyalty or fidelity that Americans have to government institutions. It's not natural. I think many times Americans look at positions of power, look at experts and say, okay, this is true. These people have our best interest in mind. It would be beyond me to even imagine a world where these people would be lying to me or misleading me. And hopefully this last administration and the administrations that came before it, to be sure, are creating an environment that the scales are falling from people's eyes, not because necessarily because, the truth is coming out, but because people have been lied to for so long that the lies that they have been told are revealing themselves, and in a way that's no longer deniable.
Well, and to that point, JP, it's when you have enough. Okay, first off, a lot of what we've been told over the last couple of years is that inflation was due to COVID, due to an actual pandemic that happened, right? So, let's forget that actual pandemic for a moment, but that event's what caused it, and therefore that caused a chain reaction of events like supply chain disruptions because businesses were shut down. Well, if that's how inflation was only created, okay, because that can be price inflation and that can be temporary. But as soon as the supply chains are fixed, those prices should come back down. Everything should return to normal, but it's not. I continue to see restaurants around here in California going up in cost. My utilities aren't getting any cheaper. And we've put in all of the LED lights and spent a bunch of money doing that, yet my bill goes up. I don't understand. That shouldn't be happening. The other thing we're seeing is, the fuel of gasoline continues to go up and stay high. Most of the last 4 years, we've been around $5 or just shy of it. Wow. A lot of the parts of the country haven't, but we have extra taxes here and other things that go on. And so a lot of stuff's built here in California or created in California and shipped out, which is going to also bring the cost up. But, my belief when I look at inflation is it's always a monetary phenomenon. And the reason why we have inflation that goes on is we've printed $1 out of every $3 that have ever been in existence in the last 5 years. That is going to push the price of things up because dollars always want to find a home. And as they find homes, it creates more demand when there's less supply, therefore pushing price up. So supply chains can definitely do that on the short term and affect things. So this kind of leads me to my next question for you too, is it's looking at the tariffs. When I look at charts, and I'll see if I can put one up here too and overlay it. If not, I'll put it in a post for everybody. But there's a chart that I saw recently that shows how much money the United States used to pull in for income into our coffers from tariffs, and it was quite a bit. It was most of our revenue was coming in from tariffs, all the way until 1950, where we completely dropped it to near zero, and it stayed there until present day. And so right now we're seeing new tariffs that have just been put on both Canada and Mexico. And I believe there's some additional ones that are going on to China starting this last Saturday. I'm also hearing there's some other things that may kick in either today or tomorrow. And we've got the ability here to pull in more revenue, which can cause other issues as well. If you're buying products from other nations or raw materials, those are going to go up a bit. but we've also got this promise, or at least a carrot out there, of potentially having our income taxes reduced or completely eradicated. And what I'm seeing is I'm starting to see things that to me seem more like a sound money type philosophy and principle. I'm still waiting to hear that the currency is going to be backed by gold. I haven't seen that yet. And that we're going to basically call gold and silver, money again, and stop taxing it as a collectible, which are some of the things that I'm hoping we'll see. But as far as tariffs go, and then kind of looking into where Doge may be able to help, what are your thoughts there?
I think that, one thing I want to address before I address that is you made a point earlier where you said that you've put in the LED lights and you've jumped through the hoops that the state has forced you to jump through, and yet still your prices seem to go up. And that, I think, mechanically is important and worth looking at. Looking at a functioning money, a good, healthy money over the long term, because of advancements in technology, because of advancements in strategy and research and all of these things, prices should trend downward. But we're finding that that's not the case. As you said, prices continue to trend upward. This is not the sign or a quality of a healthy, functioning money. And I think that in itself kind of speaks to it's an inflationary, but also this is what it looks like when you're chasing metrics, when aggregate demand becomes important, when money velocity become the two most important things about the way you're judging the health of your money. Yeah, you can easily see how those numbers could say, oh, wait, what we're spending on matters less. Let's just have a bunch of these bills in exchange all the time. And that's what makes a healthy economy. And we obviously know that that's not the case. It's the building of infrastructure. It's allowing the establishment of private property laws that allow people to growth and entrepreneurs to create and build things that eventually lead to the country becoming more wealthy. And so the idea that prices keep trending upwards, I wonder how that keeps happening. It's because the money itself is broken. I think that Trump presents a kind of an interesting dynamic here, because as you may know, as gold and silver stackers across the country probably know, Trump has said favorable things about gold and silver before. On the campaign trail in 2016, he was talking about how it would be great to peg the dollar back to gold. He was making deals, I believe paying rent, accepting gold as payment for some of his tenants. So Trump has expressed an interest in sound money, or at least a slight inkling pushing him in that direction. And so I think I'm hopeful that, things might change, or sound money might be reintroduced in a more meaningful way. But for right now, I think what you're talking about here, Trump tariffs, I think that the libertarian philosophy, or not even the libertarian philosophy, I think that this is a question here where the economics are trumped by a political philosophy or a political stance, which I think is okay if that's the way you're choosing to do it. But as far as reducing inflation, I think that largely tariffs will be inflationary. I think that as it pertains especially to precious metals owners, and dealers and those trying to buy precious metals, when you're talking about Maple Leafs, when you're talking about Libertads, you're talking about the coins and bars that are minted and made from these countries. If you slap a 25% tariff on things coming in from Canada, you're telling me that the price of a Maple Leaf just increased overnight 25%. And I don't necessarily know that that's true. And you and I were having a great conversation off camera about how the dynamics might not exactly work that way. There are existing stockpiles that will affect the price maybe, and the retail price might not ultimately get affected as much in the sense of spot, but premiums obviously are a huge conversation here going on. And we've seen premiums skyrocket in the last couple of years. During the COVID years, those Silver Eagles were carrying a premium of almost $20. You're paying $30 for the coin, a $20 premium. As an investment, it makes it impossible to actually effectively invest in these things. You're hoping for silver to go up 90% before you're out of the red. It makes it extremely difficult. So I think part of it is establishing ways to get into this market, to the extent that you're choosing to stack gold and silver. I personally am an advocate for making sure that you're getting metals as close to spot as possible, being very savvy about avoiding premium, because like we just said, and this is something that's going to fluctuate over the next several years with existing stockpiles dwindling, with who knows what's happening with tariffs coming in from these countries. Who knows if also, for example, you may have heard the squeeze that's happening in London. Who knows if the gold is even there in these stockpiles? So there are a lot of questions moving forward about how gold and silver investors should be approaching a market like this. I think that the legislative stuff that we're doing kind of lends itself to hopefully answering some of those questions, or elucidating what could come next, and where good jurisdictions are to practice some of this stuff. But on the federal level, I think that historically, the federal level, be it this administration in its first iteration, or really any other administration over the last 5 decades, has shown very little capacity or willingness to shrink the government. I think that that's a great party line. That's something you say on the campaign trail. You can even establish a government agency to look into shrinking the size of government. But that's, obviously what's happening. This I'm making a nod towards the Doge government agency, that was established to address the surplus of government agencies, which is like particularly American, right? If I saw a mouse in my house, I wouldn't establish the Department of Mice in JP's house and then conduct studies and figure out how to best eliminate the mice. I would just eliminate the mice.
Just figure it out.
So I think that it's a great thing. And I think that psychologically, the idea of turning around and shrinking things is something that many Americans have never considered. I think that we're seeing more and more. So, for example, this the U.S. aid department was shut down. I don't know if this is breaking news today. I think it shuttered its doors
late last night.
Yeah, permanently pulled funding from all of it. And I think that a lot of people hear that and think, oh no, now they're killing animals, or now they're letting diseases run rampant, or now we were so close to eradicating human poverty and suffering, but now since we cut this agency, it'll no longer happen. And I think so much of that has to do with just the lack of, a lot of people are not discerning about what the government does and where it spends its money.
It's also the names that are chosen for these organizations. It's I've got 2 degrees in advertising and branding, and they're playing on your psyche for a lot of this. And kind of what I see too, JP, is if in the past we used tariffs to function and run as a government without income tax, what changed? What happened? And why has poverty not gone away? Why don't we have world peace? Why don't we have free energy, or really inexpensive energy? The reason is because what we've done is we've built a bureaucracy. We haven't actually funneled the money to where it needs to go. We've just hired more and more people. These agencies get very, very bloated. And then you start over-regulating everything, which hurts the small guy that wants to start a business. Go try to start your own bank right now. Try to go get your bank charter. Good luck. It's going to take years, and you probably won't even get it. So, whereas in the past, when my grandfather started a savings and loan, he was able to get one very quickly, and he could get his business up and running. Now, that was also in the 50s. So actually, yeah, it was in the late 50s. So he was able to do it back then. Right now, it would be extremely hard to do it.
Right.
So when I look at the tariffs, what we're really the theme we're going back to is the late 1800s. What can we do? How did we bring the money into the country? How were people and citizens taxed? Personally, I would love to see income taxes and capital gains go completely away. I would be okay with tariffs. Now, you have to kind of ebb and flow this thing, right? So if we have tariffs coming in and I still have income tax, then I'm having an additional taxation the way that I view it.
Right.
If I can get rid of my income tax, capital gains, and there's some tariffs where some of the goods and services go up, to me, it's a little bit more of a temporary explosion in price for goods and services, especially if we also put on a consumption tax. However, over time, a lot of those companies will start to move their manufacturing here to the United States. We'll start mining and drilling to get more natural resources out of the United States. And so those prices will start to adjust. And if we're able to shrink the government down and have, say, an 80 to 90% cut in federal spending, this thing can get fixed. And then if you go back to sound money, where we start to back the US dollar with gold again, then we stop that inflation. Don't print more dollars, just back it with gold. And that leads me to the question that I can't answer, and I don't think anybody else can yet, is the gold in Fort Knox and in the New York Fed's vaults or not? If it is, we're in good shape. If it's not there, then we probably will never hear of an audit. We'll probably never admit it. And it will be a little bit scary. So,
I think that first, sorry to keep going back, but you said something. So you did this background that you have in advertising, then you know better than anyone, right? So many of these names are chosen intentionally, right? The HEROES Act, the Patriot Act, the Freedom Act. And that's not an accident. And I was on a panel with Lynette Zhang, who I think you recently had on your pod. And we were on a panel last week in Vancouver at an investment conference. And I made a point because the moderator said something that triggered the thought in me that, the Federal Reserve has an intentionally stated policy of devaluing your money by 2%. If you go to the Federal Reserve's website, it tells you this is their goal. This is the entire purpose of their existence, is to do this. And they call that having a stable money. And that is Orwellian use of language. If I came to you and said, Jared, I'm getting 2 inches shorter year over year, my height is stable, you would say, JP, I don't think you know what that word means. This is ridiculous. Of course you're not stable. You're actively devaluing year over year. Of course that's not stable. But the use of language makes it to where, it's hard to really parse through some of these things sometimes, unless you're discerning. And unfortunately, I think many people don't have the resources or the background to be able to do this stuff without having someone point it to them. And then once it's pointed to you, you're like, hey, wait, I see that everywhere.
Well, it's not just that. So, it is that, but it's a little bit more into that too, which is it continues to kill the middle class and create, a top 1% and 99% that's struggling. And how does it do that? Well, 100% of us are losing value at least 2% per year. And it's actually much higher than that. And we've seen it double digits. And then we've actually, in my opinion, it's been well over 20% a couple of years ago. It's paced down a little bit. But with the tariffs coming in, I think we're going to start to see it jumping up a bit too. But it's only for those that have things that produce interest that would have any benefit from having that. And and that tends to not be most of Americans, right? You may have a rental or two, but you guys, it's not enough to offset that 2% you're losing in everything else. However, I've noticed that my gold and silver has not been going down 2% a year. That's been going up. How about that? That's been going up. So it's pretty good. Now, like you said earlier, I'm more of a gold bug than I am a silver bug, but I do have both metals, and I have, I have reasons that I stack for different metals. Gold, what I like is it's a lot easier to move in and out of if you need to for emergencies or just for investment.
An incredibly
purposes.
Liquid market. Yeah.
It's way more liquid. The premiums are way lower on them. And having been in this industry for a while now, I found ways to buy below spot price, and I have ways of being able to sell above spot price. Now, that's not going to be everybody that's watching this, but there are ways to learn how to do that a little bit better. A lot of it just comes down to volume. I'm trying to help other people in the process. We also go to Long Beach Coin Show, which we're going to be doing here in a couple of weeks, but it's going to be the last Long Beach show. I guess their PCGS is going to be closing that show down here, is what we're hearing. So we're kind of bummed about that, but it's been something that we've enjoyed and had fun doing. And we have the best booth. When I first got it started stacking, I had sold a business. I had too much resources and I bought stuff I shouldn't have bought. So I have like one of the coolest collections. Which isn't
that's a good problem to have.
It's a good problem to have. It's not, I've got like Death Stars and I've got like really cool coins and Beskar bars, all this Star Wars stuff. That's cool.
That's cool.
And it's not a big part of my stack, but it's a part people like to come and see. And then I've got, my coins and bars and rounds that are much closer to spot price. But JP, when you're looking at all of this stuff going on, California is a state that we still don't have gold backs at. My state has gone from $1,500 up to $2,000 in purchases to get away from, paying a sales tax. As far as I can read in the Constitution, it's illegal to tax money, and it's not something that should happen. But I read into it a little bit more, and it looks like the reason they're able to get away with things like capital gains on precious metals and also sales tax is they've been able to categorize it as collectibles instead of as currency. And so it goes to kind of that mindset. So I'd love to understand a little bit more of what you guys do with the Sound Money Defense League. How can we get involved in it? How can someone like me in California that has a governor that seems to not like sound money very much, and
it barely seems like he likes California residents.
He doesn't like the residents very well. Well, seriously, I think we need water in places, right? I shouldn't be smirking about this, but I know a lot of people that lost their house. It's very tragic, but it's crazy. We had to have a president come down and turn our water on. There is so much water that's collected in the Sierra Nevada mountains that never makes it down to Southern California because of a invasive fish species that they've been trying to protect. And that doesn't work anymore. So the water is going to start coming down here. We are so dry. We were surrounded by fires for a while, even close to my house. And my son had to evacuate out of Hollywood real fast and bring his friend and a boa constrictor and a dog down to our house. We had to figure out how to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And we've watched a lot of people lose their homes, which is very tragic. And somehow, kind of oddly, insurance gets canceled just a few months before these events happen a lot of times. I'm not saying anything's planned. I'm just saying timing is everything. And, insurance companies do a lot of research and they tend to know when things could happen. Not necessarily that they're going to happen, but, hey, the conditions are getting so dry there. There's no water there. We're pulling out. We're not going to do this anymore. And the whole way that whole thing was handled in Los Angeles is a complete joke. And I'm surprised the governor didn't step down. But, what are you guys doing to do that? Because one thing I see is when people are hired to or elected to be Congress people, they typically are elected to make change, but I really don't see them reducing the amount of bills that are in Congress or getting rid of laws. No one ever cleans anything up. And so there's really so much bloat of government laws that are out there. No one can even enforce them. But now we look at a few situations where we need to try to figure out how to, make this better. How do we try to get to more sound money? How do you guys do that?
The answer that we've found is largely through legislation. And I think, like you were saying, you referred to Congress people, and DC is a swamp and it is gridlocked. And frankly, if you want to make a difference legislatively, you don't go to DC. What I can say is that while it is true that if you were to call your DC congressman right now, you might have an aide answer the phone. They might or might not deliver your message to the congressman. You might or might not get a form response back. But that will kind of be the end of the conversation. Whereas in Nashville, Tennessee, or Lincoln, Nebraska, or Salem, Oregon, or Boise, Idaho, you have an actual voice in your state legislature. And what we found, like you said, the classification of gold and silver as collectibles is not something that was done statutorily. That was something that was done by rule. The IRS just decided one day these are collectibles and thus subject to a discriminatorily high 28% long-term capital gains rate. So as we see here, there is so much friction on either side of the transaction. And that's not an accident. They don't want you using anything but the US dollar as money. So everything else that could functionally be used as money is completely saddled with restrictions, taxes, regulations, because they want to keep you in the dollar. No one woke up this morning and actively chose to use the United States Federal Reserve note. The truth is that you're trapped. You don't really have any other reasonable option. Mm-hmm. So we've taken gold and silver and we've gone state to state and we've identified what all of the sources of friction are. And we actually have the Sound Money Index. It's a ranking that we publish every year. We rank all 50 states by their sound money policies. This is the chart that has actually all the information on it.
Where's California on there, by the way?
I'm sad to say, I was actually just about to say California is currently ranked 48th.
Oh, that's good.
Having 48th out of 50. After, as you know, you mentioned earlier, it was $1,500. Now it's $2,000. California has this weird thing called a threshold where we call it a anti-poor tax. The state so I believe there are 6 states total that do this, California being one of them. The state says any purchase of precious metals below this amount, before this arbitrary amount, X, will be taxed. We're going to tax all the people making small purchases. But if you're making a purchase above this arbitrary line, that is all tax-free. This is obviously super regressive. It hurts anyone trying to do the dollar cost averaging, trying to go in and buy a silver dollar or two at the coin store once a week. So this is actively something that harms the smaller time stackers and investors. California is just one of 6 that has wrinkles like this. But in general, I'm happy to say that we have seen so much progress. I mentioned that this is now year 11 of the Sound Money Defense League's existence, doing this kind of work. And just this past year, it was our most legislatively successful year of our history. More than 28 states introduced more than 65 pieces of legislation. That means more than half of the United States is actively considering legislation to restore, or remonetize, or reallow the use of gold and silver. This is legislation that removes sales tax on the purchase of precious metals, that removes state capital gains tax when you sell the precious metals. This is legislation that would establish a gold reserve for the state, stored within the state, establish bullion depositories, bolster pension funds and state reserves with physical gold, issue or invest in gold bonds, so on and so forth. And we have, like I mentioned, all of the criteria that we use to rank all 50 states in the index here. And it's fascinating to see the way, 10 years ago, we were writing model bills, and I was begging legislators, hey, please consider this. Gold was $500 an ounce at the time, and I was begging the state, hey, you should consider buying some of this. And look now, it's so obvious that they've been derelict in the fiduciary duty that the state treasurer and the financiers of the state have to protect their citizens, to protect their state reserves. So it's in hindsight so obvious, but to us and to people who understand sound money, this has been this obvious the whole time. Yep. We've been telling you your dollar denominated debt, all of this, most of it having a negative real rate of inflation, because like you said, your 2-3% inflation number, absolutely not. That's not true. The real inflation is way higher than that. So we're encouraging, like I mentioned, there's a lot of talk about BRICS countries, and Russia is de-dollarizing, and China is de-dollarizing. But if you look closer, it's not just enemies. In some cases, it's literal neighbors of the United States. And in other cases, it's internal. It's Utah agreeing to buy $180 million worth of gold. It's the state of Wyoming last week, the Senate approving a $10 million purchase of gold held in the state. It's the state of North Dakota also last week out of committee choosing to approve a bill that would allow for at least 1% of the state's entire state funds stored in gold and silver. So we're seeing more and more of on the state level, and this is happening at an incredible pace. I am excited. It's overwhelming, the amount of projects, but there's undeniably progress happening. And on the federal level, there's legislation we've introduced with Congressman Alex Mooney from West Virginia to eliminate the capital gains tax on gold and silver off the top on the federal level. Like you mentioned, one of the interesting things about the tariff discussion happening right now is that it's sort of happening against the backdrop of, well, you would be replacing income tax with tariffs. And I wonder about the math working out. I'm not sure that it will, but the idea psychologically, choosing to stop penalizing people for working, for creating income, would be such a message to entrepreneurs and people in this country that actually want to work and build. And of course, like I just said, one of the biggest sources of friction that still exists in the United States that keeps people from using gold and silver as money is that capital gains tax. You can't use gold and silver as money today because if you walk into a grocery store to pay for eggs, when did I buy this silver eagle? What's it worth at today? what if when the carton of eggs has gone up, now it's worth 2 silver eagles. So what date did I get this silver eagle and that one? And what's my cost basis? And then I have to do this math every single time I go to. It's a nightmare. It's impossible. It's literally impossible.
So what ends up happening too is people have a lot of boat accidents, and they just give up and they throw their hands up and they say, I lost everything in a tragic boating accident. And you start putting people in situations they don't really want to be in.
Right. And that's an argument for the state, because the state, many times, unsurprising to you as someone who lives in California, I'm sure, the state sees industry and the state sees people and they see dollar signs. They see potential tax revenue. And you can make the point all you want. Hey, you're not actually collecting any of this tax revenue. This gold is being lost in boating accidents. None of this is actually being reported. You're actively harming the industry and the businesses in the state by choosing to impose this tax that you aren't even collecting anyway. But for so many legislators, they're looking at their bottom line, and in many cases they see themselves approaching a fiscal cliff, and they're saying, no, we need to retain as much of this money as possible. So in some cases, most legislators have never heard the term sound money. They've never given thought to what makes a good money. And so there's an education to this. But in some cases, legislators are against it because what do you mean we're having to lose $100,000 in state revenue a year over year? No, that can't happen. This is pennies, of course, to a state's balance sheet. But it would make a huge difference to the people in the state. Also, I was mentioning
it's investment in the state too, is what they need to realize as well. So if my income tax goes away and my capital gains go away, I can think of a dozen businesses I can start just with selling gold and silver coins, creating my own bars, creating my own pours, my own art, whatever I want to do with it. There's a lot of things you could do when you take those taxes away to where I can still have some profits in it to make it worth my time.
California being a great example of
huge.
People are leaving the state. Businesses are SpaceX, Oracle, these are large examples. And I'm sure there are many smaller ones where businesses want to go where they're respected and incentivized to work. I think that one of the things that you mentioned earlier on the federal level, some of the legislation that we're working on is actually legislation that calls for a gold audit. Like you mentioned, is the gold there? So that's the question. Is the gold in Fort Knox? I don't personally know. But what I do know is that 50 years ago, the last time that anyone saw any of that, that was a made for Hollywood, made for TV movie where they brought in cameras, they brought in congressmen, they paraded a couple bars around. Wow, look at this great bar. There was not a single assay. There was not any serial numerization. There was not a matching of bars. There was nothing in there that indicated that those bars are what they say they are and the amount in what they say they are.
Yeah, I've been on a personal call with someone that says they've been there.
Really? Inside, what do they say?
Well, they said it's there, but here's the thing. They also didn't go look at all the bars either. So how do they know it's real?
That's true.
So, you could have a top of a pallet that looks real and it's not, right? People, Hollywood all the time, they'll have, a bunch of fake money in a briefcase and they'll have a few real $100 bills on top. So it's hard to know. And even if it is all there, how do you convince everybody that it is there? How do you convince other countries? How do you convince the American people that it's real? It's going to be a little bit of a problem.
I think the bigger thing there is, that there's still a question, even if it is still there. Let's say all the ounces are there, in fact, in Fort Knox. How much of it is owned by someone else? How much of it is encumbered? How much of it has been swapped or leased? How much of it is owned by the IMF? How much is it owned by China, Russia? Even if every single ounce that they say is there, who actually owns it? Who owns it outright? And I don't know the answer to any of those questions. And that's why we actually have that legislation. It's federal legislation that calls for the gold audit, going in, assaying, making sure every single ounce is there that they say is there credibly, because the Fort Knox hasn't been credibly audited in decades. And then on top of that, calling for a full accounting of any encumbrances, swaps, leases, derivatives, any transactions involving America's gold. And I think that would be so much more useful in really helping us explain or helping us kind of figure out what the state of America's gold is, more than, bringing a camera in there or having Elizabeth Warren or Maxine Waters or whoever it is coming to Congress and saying, oh yeah, we do the audits of financial services. We're good. I don't believe you. Frankly, I don't believe you. And you've given us no reason to believe you. So we're hoping this federal bill, And like I mentioned before, people don't go to the federal level to actually pass legislation. So if I'm being honest, I'm not necessarily hopeful that these bills will actually go through the process and will be signed into law by the President of the United States. But more than ever, we've had questions about America's gold. And now when you're talking about a sitting senator talking about selling all of America's gold to buy Bitcoin, that's an entirely different
other conversation.
Entirely different proposal. But to the extent that you're thinking about selling all of your gold, you need to have a full accounting of it first. So fine, we can entertain this idea for a second, if only to get this audit and full accounting of what America's gold holdings actually are.
Well, and some of the rumors are maybe we don't have it, and that's like a ruse to pretend like we sold it, in dark pools or behind the scenes, and then we bought Bitcoin. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. But JP, this has been awesome. I'm glad that we were able to connect, and I'd love to have you on again soon. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, you can find me on X or Twitter. My X is JP Cortez 27. The Sound Money Defense League is Sound Money Def. You can find us at soundmoneydefense.org. I mentioned before the Sound Money Index. This is a project in conjunction with Money Metals Exchange. You can find that on their website, moneymetals.com. And then my contact information, my email address is on the website. So I think as a parting thought, if that's okay, I think I've sort of already mentioned this, but I encourage you to believe in the power that you have in your state. Be an active participant in these battles. So like I mentioned, it's more than 60 something bills, and every single one of those bills is considered by a legislature. And more important than having a well-written bill, more important than having fancy props, more important than me putting on a suit and talking about why this is important, is having people in the state make their voice heard by contacting their legislators, calling their state reps, emailing their state reps. The truth is that at the state level, there's almost no organization. So to receive 10 emails or 10 phone calls about any given issue is a really big deal. It's really easy to move the needle on this if people act. So I encourage everyone to become an active participant in their state legislatures, fight these fights, sign up for our mailing list, and we will give state personalized. If there's a battle going on in your state, we'll send you the notice of the hearing, the key members of the committee, their email address, their phone numbers. We'll even give you an easy pre-written message to send to them. We make it extremely easy to participate. So I encourage everyone to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, JP. And it was great having you on here. And for all of you guys that are new to the channel, please hit the subscribe and bell icon down below. And also consider putting the thumbs up. That helps the YouTube know that you guys enjoyed the video. And we'll talk to JP about having him come back on as well. And leave any comments. What do you guys think? Do you agree with what was discussed here today? Do you have some different ideas? Do you think we should sell all the gold for Bitcoin? I'd like to hear your guys' opinion on that one too. And until next time, peace out. Thank you, everybody.